that doesn't make things? No. We all make things. Everybody has seen something made. Therefore, everybody knows the characteristics of made things, like this. And everybody knows that things don't make themselves. So, do I have the same characteristics as this? As we'll see in a moment, yes, I do, in abundance. If I held this up to you, you would rightfully conclude that this had an intelligent designer to make it. And you'd be foolish not to. When you look in the mirror or you look at any place, anybody at any culture at any time must conclude, one, that there was an intelligent designer that made me. That's the problem we face in today's culture. We have a bunch of people saying, no, it only looks like it was designed, but it wasn't. Or two, we must not ascribe that making capacity to an idol, which was the problem predominantly in the past, that you ascribed it to an idol. If you make any of those mistakes, you're guilty. So everybody must come to the right conclusion, and that's why tonight's talk, does that make sense? Is it pretty simple and straightforward? You don't have to have a lot of revelation to know that there must be a creator and that you should seek him. And that's what God holds everybody accountable to. So what is the best explanation for the design found in living things? I'm adding this on to the talk as extra at no additional charge. So on that, what's the best explanation? Well, we have a debate. Design versus chance and tinkering. I guarantee you at UT, the vast majority of the scientists there hold to the latter, and tinkering. Now, did I pick the word tinkering to make it sound like I was condescending to them? No. We heard in this morning's paper that they think that it agrees with Jacob's model, which is tinkering with building new things with salvaged parts. Do you remember that? Remember that quote? Yes. So there's tinkering versus design. So I'm going to argue that how life fits together. Oh, that's a great word. Fits together. You know, when you use those words, people automatically think design, because when you see something fit together, you know it's designed, because nature doesn't make things fit together all by itself. In order to get stuff to fit together, it must be designed. It's consistent with intelligent engineering and not mindless natural processes. So that's what I'm going to be arguing, that everything I'm going to talk about tonight is consistent with that there. So design can be distinguished from random tinkering and chance events. As you look up there on that screen, can you see things that look chance-like? Don't fixate on Vanna. Look at the Wheel of Fortune there on that. Yeah, chance. You see things that are designed, like those gears, like that little creature on the thumb. You see chance things, like that monkey with a gun. You know, that's everybody recognizes chance versus design. But naturalists, those people who believe that the universe somehow creates itself without a designer, without God, they think that life's design is only an illusion. And Richard Dawkins is one of the world's most vocal evolutionists. And he said this: biology is the study of complicated things which we would naturally think were designed, that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Now, when he says appearance, he means it only appears like it, but it really wasn't. Being deluded to think that. And this is the predominant explanation that's being taught, and I will pick on University of Texas here. But Aggies do the same thing. You know, they're both deluded in this case. They're both deluded on that. One's probably more deluded than the other, but I'm not going to. All right. Yet, by the way, I'm not from Texas, so I don't have a dog in this fight on there. I'm not there. And has anybody ever heard of the state South Dakota? On that, I'm from way up north there. The only thing that buys me any credibility here is my name has South in it, in that, instead of North Dakota. All right. Naturalism asserts that design is only an illusion. Why would Dawkins say something that's so counterintuitive? Well, this quote is such a telling admission. It's a frank admission and honest by Richard Lewontin, who's a full professor of University. He's still there. I never met him when I was there, but he says this. It's the longest quote of the night, but it really sets the stage. he's talking about evolutionary scientists, we take the sign of science, and he's talking about evolutionary science, in spite, and that's his italics, not mine, in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises in life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories. Those are stories that I read to you this morning. How simple things come together and on and on. That's a just so story. Because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Materialism is the belief that matter and energy is all there is or ever was, but it's just manifested in different forms. It's not a theistic belief. It's a totally materialistic belief without God. It is not that the methods and no, this is so good. It is not that the methods and solutions of science compel us to accept material explanations. Do you know what he's saying? He's saying there's nothing intrinsic about science that forces you to be a materialist. In other words, I can be a creationist. There's nothing that compels them to do that. They do it by choice. By choice. On that. To explain the phenomena of the world, but on the contrary, we are forced by a prior adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts, here's the key, that produce material explanations. So I'm going to explain design, they're going to explain design, and they have a materialistic explanation. But here's the kicker, that produce material explanations no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Wow. Now, everybody kind of fixates on that last phrase. We cannot let a divine foot in the door on that. And that's true. They certainly don't want any illusions of God coming in the door. But what should really be appalling to us is that they accept explanations which are counterintuitive and mystifying to the uninitiated. Now, no other place in science do we do this. As a medical doctor, how would you like if I gave you explanations that were counterintuitive? You wouldn't do it. And then I was an engineer. How would you like things that were counterintuitive? You wouldn't. And how do you like this mystifying to the uninitiated? Who are the uninitiated? Us. That's right. Whoever said that? Us. Yes. It's us. You are the uninitiated. You're part of the uninitiated here. I know, poor people. But you don't want to be initiated in this case. No, this is a good initiation there. But nobody should put up with that. We shouldn't really tolerate that in science. And so I want to let you know up front, a lot of the explanations you're going to hear. I was asked at lunchtime today, why is it that scientists seem to ignore evidence? Because they're willing to tolerate counterintuitive explanations and things that are mystifying so that they don't let a divine foot in the door. That's why this is such a frank explanation of their position. It's really, really good. But God says everyone sees the design. And I already quoted this verse to you from Romans 1:19 and 20. Be assured that God made it plain to everybody. But in contrast, natural evolution asserts that no one really sees life design. What looks like design is only a false impression, but only an illusion. We're going to discuss how to push back on that tonight, how to push back on this illusionary thinking here. So, this is what Jerry Coyne says. This is important. Life on Earth evolved gradually, beginning with one primitive species, and then branched out over time, throwing off many new and diverse species, and the process producing the illusion of design in organisms is natural selection. How can that be? Well, I'll explain that to you. I'm a designer. God's a designer. The most basic thing we do as a design is we specify how we want something built. Now, when I specify something, do you know what that is fundamentally? that is an act of my intelligence which is selecting for this and not selecting for that. That's what engineers and designers do. So when someone specified this room right here, we don't have tile on the floor. You don't have wood on the floor. You have carpet here. Someone said, I want carpet. That was a specification. And not someone said, I want these things for the walls. Someone said, I want these kinds of lights. So at the most basic activity of designers is to select for things. I want to select for this, but I don't select for that. And when I build my processes, I build them like this, selecting for this step, selecting for this step, selecting for this, so everything fits together. Does that make sense? What is the pseudo-designer on this slide? The pseudo-designer is the last two words. Natural selection. They have just now slipped into nature an ability which nature does not have. In our worldview, God creates nature. In their worldview, nature creates itself. Well, how can nature create itself? Well, I will ascribe to nature this ability to, what's the key word? Select. Select. You know how many creationists have been missing this? Gobs. I ascribe to nature the ability to select, which is fundamentally ability of intelligence, which is fundamentally the activity of a designer. Now, is that true? No. Does nature have living things? Sure it does. Is nature alive? Is nature alive? No. No, nature's not alive. Nature doesn't have agency. You know what nature is? It is. It's just out there. But nature does not have a brain. Nature does not have intelligence, even though we call it Mother Nature. It really isn't a mother. Even though we say Father Time, it really isn't a father. It just is. And this is a phony projection of power onto nature, which it does not and never will have. Nature is not alive, and you end up turning nature into the substitute designer. Now, do you know what that is fundamentally? Nobody's going to catch this, but I'll give you a clue. If Pastor caught it right off, that's why he's got the degrees. If I held up to you this water bottle and I said, this water bottle can select for stuff, you might think I was crazy, but I'm projecting onto the water bottle something it doesn't have, and from a Christian perspective, that's called what? Idolatry. Here, I'll make it easier. If I held up a statue, and I held up a statue and I said, the statue can select for things, everybody would say, oh, that's idolatry. Anytime we project onto something inanimate that doesn't have that selective capacity or any other agency-like capacity, it's idolatry. This idolatry is not as frank as holding up a statue or a picture. This is kind of a subtle, hidden idolatry. It's a subtle type of idolatry where you ascribe to nature abilities that it doesn't have. You want to know what's really going on? This is what's really going on. God designs me as a creature. He pre-programs me as a creature with abilities to solve environmental problems in advance. So there's a problem in an environment. My traits solve the problem, and I fit and I fill the environment. You know that's biblical because the Bible says creatures were to be fruitful, multiply, and what? Fill the earth. So my traits solve the problem, and then some of my children have traits that fill this niche, and some of their traits have children that fill this niche, and over time creatures have completely filled the earth, solving all different kinds of challenges, displaying the great creative power of God in his adaptable organisms. You want to know how evolutionists would misascribe the credit? Like this. I'm in this environment, I solve problems and I fill it, and they'll say I was selected for by the environment. The credit goes to the environment. I'm here, I fill this niche, they'll say I was favored by the environment. I'm here, I fill this niche, they'll say I was acted on. They're not giving the creature the credit, and therefore the creature's designer the credit. They're giving credit consistently to the environment. And therefore, instead of organisms driving themselves through space and time, filling environments, they see it like this. The environment is driving organisms through space and time, shaping and molding them. So Darwin's greatest idea was not that organisms change over time. Write this down. Darwin's greatest idea is that the environment shapes organisms over space and time, becoming the substitute designer. Hopefully, this has already been worth the price of admission. Because this is important things. This is how you're understanding how this becomes so powerful, how it becomes a substitute designer, why people at University of Texas and Texas A&M, why these professors say it's only an illusion, but natural selection is really causing it. But we know that those words make no sense. Nature does not select. And we'll cover that in tomorrow's lecture a little bit more. This is very, very important on that. Okay. So the right question is, what is the best explanation for design found in nature? Is it real or only phony? Is it only apparent there? The good news is that design either flows from a real designer and is genuine, which is the favored explanation by people, or that there's no designer and it's only apparent, which is a tough sell for evolutionists. It really is. In fact, we have an ace in the hole. We have an ace in the hole. Before I go on to design, I'll just tell you this. All psychological research across the board shows that people's natural explanation for this, like I showed you in my hand, their natural explanation is always to say it was designed. That is the intuitive, logical explanation. That is natural. Studies of children in different cultures all across the planet, children usually between ages of 6 and 10, if you show them a dog, if you show them a cat in Africa, Asia, wherever, and you say, where did this come from? Children naturally say, God made it. That's where they naturally go. You know who put that into people's hearts? God did. He made it evident to them. And it takes a lot of education, or I should say re-education, to get that out of their minds and replace it with nature's designs. Nature selects. Nature favors. Nature acts on. It takes a lot of re-education, or in other words, what's another word for re-education? Brainwashing. Brainwashing to get that out of people's minds. Well, how do you know design when you see it? Well, let's start out with a real basic. Here's a footer to a building. Everybody's seen a footer. You know they're going to build a building on top of that footer. If I were to ask you about how long ago did this project start, 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago, you might say what? Well, I mean, you don't know. This is a guess. When you go across a building and you see the footer, is that the first thing or last thing built? First. Okay, so you would say it's like, it's like one of the first things. This was not a tricky question, And this was not a separate Aggies from T-Sippers kind of question. It's just like a intuitive thing. Those go down early in the project. And so most people think, well, this is early in the project. It probably started relatively soon. And as far as the building process, it started relatively soon. But the point on this is we need to start looking for something other than the material building process which we don't see. Because the project actually starts in someone's mind. It always starts in someone's mind. And even though we see footers and floors and walls and stuff like that, which are important, there is something else which is just as important as the material things to make this church, and it was the plans and specifications which originate in someone's mind. And that is immaterial. It is not material, it is immaterial, but it is just as important. Now, how do we know it's immaterial? Because I've been up here talking for 20 minutes or so, and I've conveyed a lot of information to you, but I guarantee you, if your brain was on a scale, it did not get any heavier. If it was in a volume box, it did not get any bigger. But you've gained a lot of information, and it didn't change the weight or size or shape of your brain one bit. It's completely immaterial. It's marvelous. It starts immaterially in my mind. I convey it to material things. I shoot it across compressions of air. Your ears pick it up. They translate it to electrical impulses. Your brain associates it with words, and it goes back into immaterial thoughts in your minds. It's an incredible process. And that's how it works. Plus a lot of other stuff. So we need to realize then that when we see projects, there's a material part, the buildings, and the immaterial part. It's always the designer's thoughts which set starting point, direction, goal, and the thoughts override and guide everything. But we don't really give a lot of credit to the thoughts. But the thoughts are just as important as the material things. So plans and specifications in all of human history, when we know the origins of plans and specifications, when we know it, they always come from an intelligent mind. Well, your DNA acts just like a set of plans and specifications and something else that's really important in construction, the schedule. The schedule. Your DNA acts like plans, specifications, and the schedule, and it's planning the entire building of a human being, plus making all of the materials, all the information to make all the materials, and puts it together to create and fabricate living creatures. So why should we, logically, ever assume that when I always know plans and specifications, the origins of those, they always come from a mind, and I come across DNA, which is equivalent in many ways to plan specifications and a schedule, that I shouldn't say that it comes from an intelligent mind? If I did that, that would be counterintuitive and mystifying to the uninitiated. But we don't want to do that. We want to be consistent scientifically, so therefore I should assume that it's also from a mind. Okay, point number 2 is we need to begin to recognize the patterns of design, specific patterns of design, and people a lot of times perceive them, but they don't know how to put them into words. So you're looking at that car assembly plant, and you're thinking, well, the plant looks designed, and the cars look designed. Well, how do we put that into words? Let's imagine you go into your car, you start the car, you get out, and you open the hood, and you look at your running engine. If you want to put that into words, just imagine looking at your running engine of your car. And this is what you would see as evidence of design. Would you see numerous interconnected parts? Yes. Would you see particular arrangement? Yes. Proper alignment? Yes. Moving parts, precise timing, exact dimensions and shape? Yes, yes, yes. Those are the patterns of design. Patterns of design. Proper alignment, moving parts, precise timing, and numerous interconnected parts. And when we see these, we know that these patterns are only found in human-designed things and in living things. And none of them are simple. They're only found in that. Therefore, biological complexity, here's another teaching point. If you just want to memorize this, it's always multiple parts working together for a purpose. multiple parts working together for a purpose. Does this clicker have multiple parts working together for a purpose? Yeah. My laser pointer, multiple parts working together for a purpose. Yes, yes. The car, yes. Do you have multiple parts working together for a purpose? Some of yours used to work better in the day gone by, but they're still there. They're still there. And all creatures have multiple parts working together for a purpose. How many of you have ever seen the forces of nature all by themselves, wind, rain, gravity, lightning, sunlight, blah, 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 blah? How many of you have ever seen those things put even two parts together? Never. It doesn't put parts together. Pardon me?
It takes them apart.
Yeah, it takes them apart. That's a good point. It breaks parts that are fitting together apart. That's right. On there, sorry, my part in my ear wasn't working together for a purpose there for a second. You're right. You're right. So when we see multiple parts working together for a purpose, we're seeing evidence in all of human history of intelligent design, of an intelligent designer. Wow. Identifying these is an objective, verifiable, purely scientific method. It either has them or it doesn't. And there should really be no debate over that. And complexity really escalates when you start to put in 5 parts, 10 parts, 15 parts. The probability of getting all of those parts working together goes down, 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 down. So the more parts you have working together for a purpose, the less likely it is that it's going to happen by any chance. All of that is the primer on design. Design. How do we know design? Well, we know it always starts with the brain. We know there's an immaterial part, which is the information. And now we know these patterns of design, which is summarized as multiple parts working together for a purpose. Okay, so that brings us to tonight's design talk. Darwin or design? Now that we have this background, human reproduction, 3 things you need to know. Got to take a drink here because a lot of you are keying in on those 2 words, second line down. Like human reproduction. Some of you are already blushing. I mean, no need to blush, even in church, on that. For one, I'm not going to, you don't need to protect your wife or anything there on that. Nobody's run out of this talk embarrassed. But we're going to see if this shows evidence of design on there. However, it is reproduction. So I have to, and I'm going to quote from medical textbooks, the ones that I had when I was in med school. So I have to use some words in this talk. Is everybody comfortable with the word egg? Okay, egg is okay. All right, we've got egg on the table, and nobody's run out of here scared. Okay, the counterpart to an egg is what other cell? It's called a? Look at that, in unison, sperm. Okay, now we have sperm on the table, and nobody's running out in there. One of my slides uses the V word. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Just imagine it for a second. Okay, that's on the table. Now nobody has to worry about that on there. So we've gotten through all of the scary stuff on human reproduction. 3 things you should know. There's really more than 3 things you should know. I just came up with that title because I used to just say the design of human reproduction. Someone said, that's a terribly boring title, Randy. Come up with something better. I don't know. So I'm going through the checkout line at a grocery store, and I'm waiting, and there's a magazine, which is marketed mostly to women, that said, Great Sex with Your Man, 25 Things You Need to Know. It's like, 25 things? I can't even count to that, you know? So I thought, that looks like a catchy title. I'll reduce mine to 3 on there. So, except I left off the other part. So that's how I got this title here. All right. Point number 1. As I said this morning, worship should be the normal response to science. Same thing as for the hand, as for reproduction. Same verse, I'll praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, and my soul knows this greatly. Same challenge. We'll see if we get past this talk if you want to say praise the Lord. 2, everyone sees design because God has shown it to them. Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. So we have that as our ace in the hole, so we can be confident that everybody sees the design in nature. Look what Jerry Coyne says. This is great. Page 1 of his book, Why Evolution is True. If anything is true about nature, it's that plants and animals seem intricately and almost perfectly designed for living their lives. Nature resembles a well-oiled machine with every species an intricate cog or gear. What does all this seem to imply? A master mechanic, of course. Thank you for paraphrasing Romans 1 for me. In your book on evolution, of course he sees the design. Everyone sees that. 3, biological systems are fully functional systems showing all or nothing unity. Fully functional, fully integrated, working together for a purpose. Reproduction is going to show that in abundance. Now, what's all or nothing unity? All or nothing unity in biology is a molecular organ or something which all the indispensable parts are present or nothing of its primary function is obtained. All the parts, simple as this, must be in the right place and right time. All the conditions must be at the right place and the right time, or nothing of its primary function is going to work. The primary function of reproduction is to get offspring. So we're going to see if we get offspring without that. So that's really important. And Charles Darwin gave us a test to his credit. In his book, Origin of the Species, way back in 1859, he said this: if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by, here are the words I'd like you to memorize, numerous, successive, slight modifications. What are they? Numerous, successive, slight modifications. Now, he picked all those because you have to have a bunch of them. They have to fit together, and they have to be slight, because big, wild changes sound like miracles. So they have to be little, teeny-weeny changes. If you can't explain that, my theory would absolutely break down. Let's see if human reproduction can be explained by what? Numerous, successive, slight modifications. And this talk is going to be somewhat complex because we want you to feel like you want to worship the Lord, so you have to be immersed in a little bit of complexity to appreciate it. So I'll try to make it complex, but if it's not complex enough for you, stop me and say, Dr. Galuza, crank up the complexity a little bit more, and I'll do it, all right? So you want to be able to feel this. So we're going to go into some complexity. All or nothing unity at the cellular level. There you go. The 2 major player cells. On the screen, over on the left, is a drawing of a huge sperm cell. Now, we've all recognized that, but please start to notice the parts. Even the cell has lots of parts. We're going to talk about this acrosome, this part on the tip. The head, which is the DNA, Dad's contribution to the DNA, all wound up. A midsection here, which is like a little motor to make this tail whip back and forth in the tail. Lots of pieces, lots of parts in those parts. Lots of parts even at the cell. Now, a human sperm cell is one of the smallest cells in the human body. Very, very small. And on the right-hand side of the screen is a drawing from a medical text of a freshly ovulated egg, human egg. Now, you notice it's not smooth like a hen's egg. It has these cells. These are cells drawn around on the outside of the egg, and these cells used to be part of the ovary. And when that egg is ovulated, those cells, which are part of the ovary, detach and come with it. That's called the corona radiata, or the radiating crown of the egg. Now, the egg is the largest cell in the human body. And you can see, here's the size of a human sperm compared to an egg. Teeny, weeny monster right there on that. Well, guys, you're on the stage first, because we're going to talk about how you make a sperm. Sperm starts out as a stem cell. How many of you have heard of stem cells? Stem cells are cells that can duplicate almost indefinitely. And that's what a sperm cell starts out as, a stem cell. And you'll notice it's round, spherical, like a regular cell, with all these organelles inside of the cytoplasm. That's the fluid inside the cell membrane. And over about 60 to 70 days inside a testicle, it begins to transform. Information causes it to grow a tail. Information causes these organelles to rearrange in the midsection to form this little machine. Microtubules grow out to give it a whip-like tail. It loses a lot of weight, poundage, by shedding this cytoplasm. And over that period of time of about 60 days, it goes from basically a beached whale kind of a cell to this lean, mean swimming machine at the end. It's a highly complex process to get that. Well, they developed behind something in the testicle called a blood-testes barrier. You never heard of a blood-testes barrier because they don't talk about it that often. But it's absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. It's a structure inside the testicle, and the sperm develop shielded behind it. Why? I'll tell you why. When you're developing inside your mother's womb, male or female, your body's immune system is learning its own markers. Your markers are unique to you and nobody else on this planet. They're closer for identical twins, but not even exactly the same. So they're unique to everybody, and your immune system is memorizing markers for all different kinds of cells, saying, this is self, self, self. And it wants to know self from non-self. Because if something gets into your body in the future, which is non-self, it will destroy it. And your immune system is very good at destroying things. Well, boys don't begin producing sperm until they're about, 12 or 13 years old, when their voice starts to crack and change and that kind of stuff. The markers of the sperm have not been memorized yet by the immune system. So the immune system would attack them as non-self and destroy them. But they develop behind this barrier. The barrier protects them. And the barrier is made up of two other types of cells, and that's what you see on the screen here. These are called nurse cells, and nurse cells have long arms, and the arms reach out and they kind of grab each other, making a barrier. So the stem cells slip through the barrier, and then they start their process to form sperm cells. And this is the barrier. And this is what it looks like in real life. This is a cool photograph. It's a biopsy. It's a tissue biopsy. Now, the tissue would normally be clear, but we stain it. You stain it with a couple stains. One turns blue, one turns pink. And we see chromosomes winding up inside the sperm cell. And look here. Here's sperm with their whip-like tail already formed. Here's the blood-testes barrier. Now, this is a real biopsy from some guy where someone took a hollow, sharp needle and stuck it inside of the testicle, pulled out a little plug of tissue. Wow, half the audience is like, don't talk like that, But, his pain, our gain, because we get to see what's happening here on that. And this is remarkable. You see the process, right, with a little biopsy. And what's cool is this biopsy clipped a little blood vessel, clipped a tiny little either vein or artery, capillary, right there. Can you see that? You can see the little blood cells stained right in it. That's a remarkable photograph. Now, we know the blood system has antibodies, and it's separated by that barrier. Can you see that? The barrier is keeping them away. Wow, that is really cool. This is what a medical text says. Not all self-antigens are exposed to the immune system scrutiny during fetal development. Consequently, they escape being recognized as self. Similarly, developing sperm cells are shielded from the immune system by the blood-testes barrier, and because sperm cells are not formed until puberty, the immune system is not exposed to their antigens, their markers. If the testes become inflamed, however, sperm antigens may escape into circulation. The testes then become a target of the immune response, which causes sterility. Now, sterility from an evolutionary standpoint is a bad thing. It brings evolution to a screeching halt. Does everybody see why that happens? You can't evolve if you can't reproduce. So you have to explain this, if you're an evolutionist, in a logical way. So we would ask the question, How did sperm ever survive without a blood testes barrier? How did sperm develop without the nurse cells, those cells which make the blood testes barrier and do other functions to protect the sperm? The absence of either one of these is sterility, which brings a quick halt to evolution, but the genetic information for the development of the nurse cells and the blood testes barrier is carried for the chromosomes carried by the sperm. That's kind of tough. You need the information to make sperm, but you can't get these other structures unless you have, to make sperm, unless you have the information for that. It's a classic what? Chicken and egg phenomenon. You need everything fully functioning together, which is what a good designer does. They build things to all function together right from the very beginning. Well, this is a great thing that you could ask your evolutionist friends. Now, I put these slides in from a conversation right before the talk, because this is really important. You're going to be told that human beings are like 98, 99% similar to chimps genetically. How many of you have heard that? Yeah, everybody teaches it. But that's it's not true. Not even necessarily true. It's not even true. That figure that they came up was from cherry-picked data. This paper right here, published in 2010, is the very first full sequence comparison. It's taking a chimpanzee Y chromosome, full sequence, and comparing it head-to-head with a human Y chromosome, full sequence. Now, if you're taking notes, just write this down. Y chromosome, world's best chromosome. I mean, it's a great chromosome. Why? Because it's the chromosome that prescribes maleness. Maleness. Males have an X and a Y, women have an X and an X. So, this is comparing chimp male chromosome with human male chromosome, and this is what the paper says. Chimp and human Y chromosomes are remarkably divergent in structure and gene content. Nobody's been talking about this. First full sequence of MSY, that's male-specific Y, 53% difference in specific gene content, 33% difference in gene category, and human Y has a third more entirely different classes of genes. Does that sound like 98, 99% similar? No way. I don't hear this in the textbooks. This is the latest research. So if you were talking to your friends, you can say, in the very first full sequence comparison of male and chimp Y chromosome, they were almost 50% different. And that would be a factual statement. It goes on to say that the difference is so big it's like 310 years comparing human to chicken on that. Now, the other take-home point is this. Guys, when your wife says to you, you're acting like an ape, you say, no, I'm not acting like an ape, and I have a study to prove it. That's not it. But the jury's still out on you. So that's what no, don't say that. All right. All right. We have all that. Okay. Now we get to fertilization. All right. Fertilization, I was taught in high school, was really simple. All that had to happen was Sammy's sperm needed to meet Elvira egg. And I remember that from my biology teacher. Very, very complex. And it becomes the first cell of a genetically unique person. And what I'm saying is this. Nobody has ever lived on this planet, and nobody ever will live on this planet, who is genetically identical to you. You are 100% totally unique. Unique. Nobody is ever going to match up with you, and anybody who has ever been. And this is the first cell of a genetically unique human being. Okay, this is a picture, a drawing. It's a great drawing. It's a chalk drawing made in the 1800s. So if you could make an incision in the pelvic area of a gal, lift the skin back, look inside, you would see these structures. You would see this uterus right here. You'd see a fallopian tube, also called a uterine tube. You'd see an ovary held in place by a ligament, and everything kind of held in place by this broad ligament. Now, how does the broad ligament work? You've all seen those commercials for Seal-A-Meal, where you put some meat in there and then it sucks the air out and it kind of holds everything down in place. A broad ligament is kind of like that. It's kind of holding everything in place inside there, and that's what its function is, to kind of keep everything stable. And this is a wonderful chalk drawing actually made by a famous British anatomist called Gray from his textbook called Gray's Anatomy. And that's where this title of the TV show came from. Now, this is what it looks like artistically, but if I was doing this talk in Oklahoma, I'd do like a simplistic drawing on a napkin or something like that so that they would kind of like figure out what's going on. And what you would have is, someone thinks Okies are funny. All right. By the way, when I go to Oklahoma, do you know who I mention? Anyway, so once a month, an egg, no, the fancy term is ripens, and it matures and it's ovulated. It's swept into a fallopian tube by these finger-like projections. Sweep it in. It makes its way along the fallopian tube. If there are sperm in the fallopian tube here, and it's a big if, not just related to intercourse or not, but if they're there, it may be fertilized, begin to divide, find its way inside the uterus, and implant in the inner lining called the endometrium, which is surrounded by a muscular layer called the myometria. The muscular layer is going to push baby out. The inner layer is shed once a month, but it grows and it's making its way for baby to implant inside that inner layer right there. Now you notice that I said if sperm are present. This is what a medical textbook says. Although sperm are self-propelling, their journey through the female reproductive tract is a difficult one, to say the least. The acidity of the vagina is hostile to sperm, and millions of them leak from the vagina or die almost immediately upon being deposited there. So you have all these sperm. They're trying to make their way through this female reproductive tract, and a lot of them are dying. So picture this in your mind. Survivors forge ahead through the cervical mucus and upward through the uterus and uterine tubes. So you can see these sperm making their way headlong through this. Within the uterus, thousands more are destroyed by resident phagocytic leukocytes. Wait a second here. What in the world is a resident phagocytic leukocyte? Well, I'll tell you. That's a fancy schmancy term for a white blood cell. A white blood cell, and you know those are part of your immune system, your white blood cells. It's resident because it lives inside a uterus. That's its home. It's got its little uterine home. It's resident. Phagocytic, it eats other cells, and it is a leuko-white site, white cell. So it's a white cell which eats other cells, which lives in the uterus, okay? That's a resident phagocytic leukocyte. So thousands of these sperm are being destroyed by resident phagocytic leukocytes. Why? Are those sperm self or non-self? Non-self. Of course they're going to get destroyed. And it is estimated that only a few thousand, and sometimes fewer than 500 sperm out of the millions of the male ejaculate finally reach the uterine tubes, where the oocyte, that's the egg, may be drifting leisurely toward the uterus. I mean, so picture this. Here's the sperm fighting their way through the tract, dying by the thousands and this and that. And here comes the egg, dope-a-dee-dope, leisurely toward the uterus right there. It's like a little mini story of life here, you know, on seeing that. Wow. A sperm count of less than 20 million per milliliter makes impregnation improbable. 20 million. That's a lot. Well, how many sperm does the average man make in a day? The average guy makes 200 to 300 million sperm a day. 200 to 300 million. Some of us make a lot more, of course, but the average guy, 200 to 300 million sperm. That's an incredible number of those right there. Wow. Well, why are there barriers? Why does this happen? Well, because unlike a man's body, in a woman's body, a baby's got to get out. Well, if a baby can get out, then a bacteria could get in. A virus could get in. Fungus could get in. And they could cause an abdominal infection. You can go right through the vagina, through the uterus, out a fallopian tube, and touch her liver. But hardly any women ever get infections like that. Why? Because there's barriers or protective things in place. The acidic environment, which we already talked about, kills all kinds of foreign invaders. Right at the cervical opening, there's a mucus plug, a thick mucus plug, which kind of like plugs that opening like a cork in a bottle. Just plugged it right off. On top of that, the uterus is lined with cells with finger-like projections called cilia. And these finger-like projections are moving in unison, like kind of like rowing a boat. And they're always moving to push things out of her body. So it's like swimming upstream because of the current that these make on a microscopic level. And then, of course, we know about those resident phagocytic leukocytes, which are lurking around everywhere on that, looking to find something to destroy on that. So with all of these barriers, you're probably asking, what's a lonely sperm to do? You know, how do they ever make it to an egg? You know, everybody just kind of like anthropomorphizes these things. Well, in addition to the sperm, you have these seminal fluids, and the seminal fluids neutralize the acid on contact. Not only do they neutralize the acid, it actually activates the sperm, making them start to swim and mobile. Otherwise, they're not mobile till that time. What about that thick mucus plug? Well, there are substances in the seminal fluid which cause the mucus plug to thin out and become thin and watery, so that now a sperm can actually swim through this watery surface. What about those flushing rhythmic contractions? Upon contact with the cervix, the seminal fluids cause those contractions to reverse direction. So instead of pushing things in, they suddenly turn around and they start pulling things in, pushing things out, they start pulling things in. Now that's pretty remarkable, because this is something that's made in a man's body which having effect on the woman's. And Darwinians have to explain that by what? Numerous, successive, slight modifications. That's kind of tough to do. This is what it looks like in real life. This is a great picture, photograph of a uterine lining. And you can see that it's not smooth, it's rough because of all those finger-like projections here. Here's a sperm. And you notice what's cool about this? Look at these ripple marks. You know what that is? That's tiny muscles inside the uterus which are covered with this lining. And just like if I had my shirt off, you could see bulging muscles on me on that. You can see those bulging muscles inside this uterus. And these muscles actually also contract in a rhythmic fashion called a peristaltic fashion, and they also switch direction, just like the cilia. And you know what this is right here? That's a resident phagocytic leukocyte. Right there. It's a white cell, and it's going to home in and try to destroy that. Wow. And then finally you have those attack cells. Well, how do you ever get by those? Well, seminal fluids cause a blunting or a suppression of the female immune response, not throughout her entire body, but only within the uterus. Just enough so that those cells will survive, someone will survive and make it to the egg. Well, you think, well, wouldn't that leave her open to bacterial attack? It might, except the seminal fluids also have antibacterial properties. So even though they reduce her immune response, they provide protection at the same time. And now Darwinists have to explain that by what? Numerous, successive, slight modifications. Aren't the details glorious? The details are glorious. And you know, it's not the devil who's in the details, it's God who is in the details. He's in the details. Well, is there anything made in a woman's body that's going to have its effect on the man or the sperm? Well, of course. That's why I'm asking the question here. Do you realize that sperm have to be capacitated within the female reproductive tract? Now, what does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. Look here at the tip of this sperm. You see this structure called an acrosome. What it is, it's a tiny little sac. It's a sac that contains enzymes that can dissolve tissue. Now, what tissue do they have to dissolve? Remember the egg, when it was freshly ovulated, it's coated by what? Cells. Do you remember that? In order to get to the membrane of the egg, these enzymes in the tip must be released, dissolve those cells on the outside down so that the sperm can actually unite with the egg. And there's a protective cap on the top of the acrosome, which is changed by secretions within the uterus and the fallopian tubes. And this is what a medical text says about this whole process. As sperm swim through the cervical mucus, uterus, and uterine tubes, they undergo a gradual capacitation for the next few hours. That means they're being changed so they can actually fertilize an egg. This is a pretty elaborate mechanism for preventing the spilling of acrosomal enzymes. But consider the alternative. If sperm had fragile acrosomal membranes while still within the male reproductive tract, they could rupture prematurely, causing some degree of self-digestion of the male reproductive system. Because a guy's making 200 to 300 million a day, if you ruptured these prematurely, it could cause that. Now that is a terrible thought. I mean, that is like too unimaginable to even contemplate. Guys, that could ruin your day. You know that? And Darwinists have to explain this through a series of what? Numerous, successive, slight modifications. I wonder how many guys were victimized until the modifications came into place. That's incredible. Well, here it is. Here's an egg. It's got the sperm around it. And this is what it looks like in a drawing. There's a process going from left to right. Time is going from left to right. What we see here is a picture of a gigantic egg, just a tiny portion of it. Here's the membrane of the egg, and here's a sperm making its way close to this membrane of the egg. Here are the acrosomal enzymes, and they're released. So they start to dissolve their way in. And finger-like projections, microtubules, are going to grow from the head of the sperm, and they are going to latch with one of these receptors on the outside of the egg. It's a tiny little molecule that will fit molecules on the tip of the sperm just like a lock in a key. And it is species specific. That means only human sperm can fertilize a human egg. You can't get other creatures to have that happen. Now, what caused those enzymes to be released? This is cool. These receptors on the outside of the egg are sending out a signal which is detected by the sperm, and when the sperm detects that signal, which means it's in close proximity to the egg, boom, the acrosome ruptures and releases the enzyme and dissolves its way up to the egg. And then these microtubules will latch on to one of those receptors. And then the membrane of the sperm will fuse with the membrane of the egg. The picture doesn't show it, but microtubules will grow from the egg, grab onto the DNA in the head of the sperm, and pull the DNA into the egg. The chromosomes will line up with each other, and fertilization has taken place. Wow. And that's the simple version. That's the simple version of what happens there. Wow. That's pretty elaborate. And all of that so that we can get one sperm to fertilize an egg. But how many sperm do we want to fertilize an egg? Just one. Because if you had more than one, 2 or 3, then it's not going to develop into a baby. There's a chance it will develop into a cancer, which is bad for mom. So what processes are there to prevent multiple sperm from fertilizing an egg? Well, this is kind of cool also. Once the sperm touches one of these receptors on the outside of the egg, immediately a tiny electrical charge is released by the egg that swarms over the outside of the egg, and any sperm still in contact get zapped. You kind of get a little electrical charge, boom. Also, within a thousandth of a second, all of the other receptors surrounding the outside of the egg, of which there's tens of thousands of them, all of them immediately change their shape so no other sperm can lock onto them. And then, over a period of minutes, tiny little vesicles inside the membrane of the egg release a contents which absorbs water, causing the membrane of the egg to thicken up so no additional sperm can make their way in. Wow. All of that so that no additional sperm will fertilize. And Darwinists must explain all of this by what? Numerous, successive, slight modifications over a period of time. Do you realize that's why they don't tell you the details? That's why they want you to see how humans evolved in 6 million what? Simple steps. But nothing is simple about this by any means. Okay, here's a time to promote signing up for this publication. This is important stuff. You need to be able to share this with your friends. This is free, and it's been free from our ministry for 40 years. If you want to keep current on what evolutionists are teaching and instruct your kids, please sign up for this. We want people to have this information, and there's articles every month on this. Everything I'm talking about on Repro is in two-page articles in this book. So if this is of interest to you and you like talking about this and you think you could use this in evangelism, or you just want to worship the Lord better, this is a useful book. And this book covers a lot of what I talked at the beginning on how do you see design, how do you recognize design, how do you share design with your friends. So these are, I think, pretty helpful resources if you'd be interested. Okay, now let's finish off the story. Egg is ovulated. Egg goes through the fallopian tube. It's fertilized, begins to divide, and implant inside the uterus. And from that point, baby begins to grow. Now, we've had to change our thinking in the medical world about baby. And this is what the medical text says. We need a major change in our understanding. This is an ultrasound. Some of you guys have recognized ultrasounds. This is an ultrasound of a tiny little baby boy inside mom's uterus. Here's his little legs, his foot, all those kinds of things. And the medical text says this: in the past, the fetus was envisioned as a passive passenger of the pregnancy unit. So baby was seen as what? Just riding along in the bus as a passive passenger of the pregnancy unit. By the way, what's a pregnancy unit? In medical lingo, a pregnancy unit is one woman who's pregnant with a baby inside her. That makes a pregnancy unit in medical language right there. But nothing could be further from the truth. The fetus, is the dynamic force in the orchestration of its own destiny. Let's see how it's doing that. Well, here's a picture of a pregnancy unit right on the screen there for everybody to see. So, right after fertilization takes place, and that cell begins to implant inside the uterus, so those few cells, now they have DNA from dad and mom. Would that be recognized as self or non-self? Non-self. Is mom's body able to destroy a few cells? Sure, without any sweat, except once fertilization takes place and throughout the entire pregnancy, little signals and chemicals are transmitted into mom's body, causing her immune system to be suppressed within inside her uterus, so that she doesn't reject, just like you would reject a heart from a heart transplant without immunosuppressive drugs, so she doesn't reject this little baby inside of her uterus, and baby is causing that to happen. Mom needs lots of hormones to maintain the pregnancy, including one progesterone. Guess who's making these hormones? Baby and the placenta are making these hormones and pumping them into mom's body so that she can maintain this pregnancy. Mom's body needs to recognize that she is pregnant even before she knows that she is pregnant. Before she says, hey, something's missing, her body already knows something's missing, and it's already been told by baby with over 24 different signals that you're pregnant and you need to start changing immediately. Immediately. And baby sends all of these signals to mom's body to do that. Mom's body needs to pump up a lot more blood because she's going to lose blood on delivery, and now she has to provide additional blood around the placenta. Guess who sends signals to mom's body saying, make more blood, make more blood? Baby sends these signals. Mom's body responds passively and makes more blood. Of course, that could crank her blood pressure way up, except baby sends other signals to mom's body saying, control your blood pressure, control it, even though you're pumping a lot more blood into that system. On top of that, mom now has to provide food and nourishment for not only herself, but also for placenta and also for baby. And so mom's metabolism is going to go cranking up. There's a hormone very similar to thyroid hormone, which is dumped into mom's body, making her hypermetabolic. Guess who's making that hormone, cranking up mom's metabolism? Baby is. Baby is. And that's why women, when they're pregnant, are always hot. You know, they come to bed, they're kicking the covers off, like, hot, hot, hot. You know, otherwise they're pouring them on. That's because they're in a hypermetabolic state, and baby is cranking up mom's metabolism for that. Mom's uterus is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as the day for pregnancy gets, as the day for delivery gets closer, and that uterus is going to have to push baby out. Well, how does it know when to do that? Well, there are receptors which are going to grow all over the uterus, tiny microscopic receptors for a hormone called oxytocin. Man-made oxytocin is called pitocin. And those receptors are going to increase in number as mom's estrogen level increases throughout the pregnancy. Guess where the estrogen comes from? Baby. Whether it's a male baby or female baby, the components to make estrogen are taken in by mom's body, go through the placenta, into baby's body. Baby makes the estrogen, pumps it to the placenta, goes out into mom's body. Her level goes up. The higher and higher the level goes up, the more of these receptors begin to develop on the uterus. And the more receptors for oxytocin, the more irritable her uterus becomes. And the closer she gets to delivery date, she starts to get these false contractions called Braxton Hicks contractions. And that's how you know that these receptors are growing all over the uterus, which baby is causing. On top of that, when the day of delivery comes, mom is going to push something out the size of a watermelon through a hole that normally doesn't pass anything that big. How does that happen? All that skin is going to stretch enormously, and the ligaments in the pubic area are going to flex enormously. The skin stretches and the pubic ligaments flex because there's a hormone circulating in mom's body called relaxin, which causes that skin to relax. And baby is making the relaxin. And it begins to build up in mom's body throughout that entire time, causing not just those ligaments and joints to become loose, but all of them. And that's why women, as they get closer and closer to delivery, they have kind of yeah, I'm glad you said it, not me. I have a waddle walk on there because the joints are getting a little bit. See, I pause and some gal will always fill it in. Thank you. Thank you for the waddle on that. Everybody has seen it. Now you know why it happens there. And then baby is going to be born and wants something to eat. And so throughout the entire pregnancy, the medical textbook says that mom's breasts reach optimum morphological and physiological maturation, which is a fancy way of saying they get bigger. And so baby, when it is born, has something to eat because baby's been pouring a hormone called prolactin into mom's body, so that when baby is born, it can actually have something to eat. And baby's doing all of this. And that's why the medical text says these are but a few examples to indicate unambiguously that the embryo, that is the baby and placenta, or both, direct the orchestration of the physiological adaptations of pregnancy. The maternal organism, otherwise known as mom, passively responds, even at times to her own detriment. You know what that means? While baby is in that womb, what baby wants, baby gets. And mom passively responds. And baby is driving the bus. Clearly, the fetus infant acts to ensure its own survival. This is incredible. Not only do you need all this design from dad, not only do you need all this design from mom, you need all of this design in the baby. Because what we now know is it takes a baby to make a baby. And that's hard to explain through numerous successive slight modifications. That's tough. And now you know the details, and one, you should be able to see that it clearly has numerous parts working together for a purpose. And two, it should lead you to want to say, praise the Lord. We have a great and incredible designer. Amen? Amen. Well, thank you so much, and I guess I'll just open it up for questions.
Yep. We have microphones on each aisle there. If you have a question, if you'd quickly make your way to a mic. And so we're going to take about 10 or 15 minutes of questions here if you've got one. Just go to the mic. Yeah, don't speak from where you are because folks over here can't hear you. Can you make sure that mic's on, Tim?
It's green. It's green.
There you
Okay,
go. There you go.
Yes, for chimpanzees or apes or human beings, could you tell me the number of chromosomes each one has?
And that's a good question. We don't have the exact same chromosomes between chimps and humans. We have 46, and the humans have 46, and chimps have 48.
Okay, so how in the world could these different chromosomal organisms, exist? How could one produce another if they don't have the same chromosomal number?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we should ask our evolutionary friends with that. How in the world can that happen? Well, I'll tell you how they would respond, and I'll give you the answer to that response. That would be useful to you. One is that amongst creatures, there's different chromosomal numbers all the time. Humans have 46 chromosomes, but in a room this size, some of us might have more or less. And people seem to function with this difference all the time. Two, evolutionists would say what really happened sometime in evolutionary history was that two chromosomes of chimpanzee fused together to make a single chromosome. And they would call that chimp 2A and 2B to make human 2 chromosome. And therefore, and they're going to look for that fusion site, and they believe that they see the fusion site, and therefore, because these two chromosomes fuse together, that's how you're able to go from an ape-like ancestor, which probably had 48 chromosomes, to humans which had 46 chromosomes. And they would even say that that is evidence for evolution, is this fusion site.
Pardon me, sir, but at the same time, wouldn't you have to have two breeding pairs at exactly the same time
Yes.
and in the same location for that to happen?
Yes, that's a good response. Yes, that's a good response. That's a good question, because you could end up with this chromosomal fusion, but unless it happens in both sexes, you're not going to be able to get offspring. You're going to have a chromosomal mismatch.
And wouldn't they have to be like land animals on land and aquatic animals in aquatic areas? I mean, you can't have a fish on land or...
Something like that, but
Yeah.
if we just kept it to chimps, because that's where their main argument is going to be, and I really want to get this answer out, so in case somebody hears this explanation in the future, they have a response to that. We have now sequenced the area, ICR, of human chromosome 2, looking to see if there's evidence for this fusion of chimp 2A and 2B. And the fusion site that the evolutionists claim is not just a mishmash of DNA, which you would find at the end of two chromosomes which are fused together. Far from it. It's actually in the middle of a coding gene. So it's hard to explain that as a real fusion site and get a coding gene out of it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Sure, you're welcome.
I've got a question relating to this morning's service and the discussion of the human hand. Many years ago, I met a NASA scientist, rocket scientist, who had worked on a robotic hand, and it was obviously very rudimentary. It was able to mimic the grasping function of a hand, but had no feedback. They had to look into a camera in order for someone to see when he was beginning to feel pain as he shook this hand, grasped this hand, so that it wouldn't crush his hand. I know medical sciences must have progressed tremendously since then, but I know we can't build a hand. How much, say in percentage, of medical science's ability to create a human hand would you say we are now?
Oh. To be honest with you, I don't think I could give you an accurate percentage because I don't have that data, and frankly, I don't know if anybody has that data. What we do see is there's the hand that you're talking about has been replaced because I have video clips of more modern human-designed hands to replace it, and now they actually have feedback and they can type on a keyboard. And so they're actually typing and they sense keys and they can push on the keys and they pick up and they type. And they're typing about this fast. Now, I'm not laughing at that by any means because that is an incredible technological achievement to be able to do that. And I am thankful that they can do that, and I marvel at the technology to be able to type with a hand, to have feedback, to sense it, to detect the keys, and to do those kinds of things. All that to say is, it's still only a rudimentary, it only has rudimentary capability when compared to real human hands. So if that is an incredible technological achievement, it would seem to be foolish not to ascribe this to incredible technology as well. And the same. So a percentage, I don't know. It's a fraction. It's I don't know, 10, 20%. It has some function like human hands, there's no doubt about it, but it's only a tiny little fraction. But all of that just goes to show how incredible it is. Now, if you want to see a really cool robot on the YouTube that actually has some pretty good function, it's the U.S. Marine Corps' pack mule robot. It's kind of like called, the Marines come up with a name like the Slick Dog 6 or something like that. But it's a great pack mule robot which actually can walk, and it can carry 400 pounds. And it's got all kinds of sensors and the like, and it really performs very well. But compared to humans, its performance is very, very limited. But it's, in my opinion, one of the best robots out there going.
Thank you.
It's kind of a simple question, but what is it that initially draws the sperm to target an egg in the female body?
Yeah, that's a great question there. And so research shows that there are, and everything goes to design. Everything goes to design. So, before I give the answer, how would we design something as human beings if you had an entity out here and you wanted another entity to move towards it? How would you design that? Magnetism? Or you could use a magnet. Okay, so you would have maybe this has a magnet or this has a magnet, maybe both has a magnet. Or maybe one has a magnet and another has a magnet sensor. That would work. Could you work on that? But you'd have to have a magnet sensor. You could have it detecting anything on that. So you could have it detecting light. You could have it detecting magnetism. But you would have, on one or both entities, you would have some kind of signal, maybe a magnetic signal, a light signal, a chemical signal. You'd have to have some kind of signal, and on the other entity, you would have to have a signal detector. Was that all you would have to have? No. You'd have to have a signal detector, and then you have to have a logic center inside that says, if this signal, then do that. If no signal, then do that. Do you see? You have to have logic that says do this or don't do that. And then you have to weigh to affect an outcome. So if there's a signal, then I want to move towards it. That's exactly how a sperm tracks on an egg there. Once the egg is ovulated and swept into the fallopian tubes, there are tiny little chemicals that are released by the egg that have little vapors that waft around inside the female reproductive tract. And the sperm detect those little chemicals, and they have a chemical detector on them, and they have programming within inside of them that says, go after this chemical, and they are able to detect not only the chemical, but the concentration of that chemical, and the more and more concentrated it gets, the more and more they go towards that. Does that make sense? And that's how it works, and it functions very similar to how a human design thing would work, indicating evidence of design.
Very good. Let's take one more over here.
Okay, I wrote this early on, so it's kind of back in the seminar.
Yeah.
If evolutionists believe that a natural environment pushed life to more complex species, how do they equate this with the laws of entropy, which is also arguably a natural process?
Yeah. Okay, let me explain. Since you know what entropy is, and you know what all that is, but maybe nobody else does, I'll just explain what entropy is. Entropy is what this gentleman over here said when I said, does nature put things together? He says, no, it tears them down. Entropy is a tendency for all things to go towards a state of maximum randomness and minimum energy. So you're losing energy over time and you're getting more and more random on that. For me to stand up takes energy. It would be natural for me to fall down. It's more natural for a lot more of you to fall down, but it's natural for that to fall down on that. So what this young man is asking here is, if this is the natural tendency for anything to happen, how can nature select it to build higher and higher things? Well, they would argue that it's not, in their view, contrary to the laws of entropy, because you're getting additional input for information from the environment. And the input of information is random genetic mutations, how it alters the DNA. And so these alterations in DNA coupled with an organism's inherent ability to metabolize, take in energy, and convert energy to useful work is the mechanism of how nature over time can build structures. These two things working together. Even though they would freely admit that in the big, big picture, entropy is still there, in an isolated picture, it's overcome by these two mechanisms working together. Okay. What's the pushback to that? Well, there's several. One, nature doesn't cause the changes inside of organisms because everything in your body works by systems. Not one element, not one organ, not one molecule, but systems of molecules and organs and elements working together, just like in man-made systems. And within the systems, you have certain parts which are absolutely necessary in order for the system to work. And if you took away any one of the parts, the system would stop. Therefore, none of the parts in and of themselves are causal. The whole system is causal. So even if you changed by a cosmic ray one of the molecules of DNA, that in and of itself is not causal for the change. The system is always causal for the change. So you can't attribute any causality to that in and of itself. Second, the pushback is that what we're really seeing is not nature select or nature favor. We're seeing organisms express the traits which is an inevitable outcome or inevitable consequence of the outworking of their systems. So if there's a problem out there, and I make a trait that solves the problem, that's how we see it as an engineer. My solutions solve the problems. God's solutions, the traits, can solve an environmental problem, or they can't. But the potential to solve the problem is already in the organism. It's up front. And so when I move into this environment, I fill it. I actively fill it. Causality resides with me. I make the traits. My traits solve it. I fill it. The selection event, which they call nature selected it, it's only happening in one place, in their mind. In their mind. They're calling it selection, but there's no selector out here selecting for anything. It's a projection of selection onto something that doesn't really select. And it's stealing the credit. Let me give you an analogy. Let's say I'm an engineer. Okay, we're next to Houston, Johnson Space Center. We design a space shuttle. And the space shuttle makes its way through the atmosphere and successfully lands. And you're the engineer, and I say to you, why did the space shuttle make it through? And you said, well, the atmosphere selected for that space shuttle. And then tragically, another space shuttle trying to make its way through the atmosphere burns up, over Texas, by the way, and all of the people are lost. And I say to the other engineer, why did that space shuttle break up? And you say, well, the atmosphere selected against that one. Would anybody accept such a silly explanation? No. But we do it in biology all the time. The reason why one made it is because the design was successful. The reason why the other one didn't is because the design was not successful. The environment doesn't select for, it doesn't select against. It's either design, success, or failure. Does that make sense? And nobody in any other area would accept selected for, selected against. But in biology, they default to that explanation constantly. Am I not right? Selected for, it was selected against. As an engineer, there's a problem out there, and I make potential solutions to the problem. My solutions either succeed or fail. And nobody would say the problem selected the solution, except in biology. But the reason why that's bad is because it transfers causality and credit away from the organism, and it gives causality and credit to the environment. Now, if a human engineer would be insulted by giving credit for my designs to the environment, how must God feel? When we don't credit him. And that gets, and just to close the loop, takes us right back to where we began in Romans chapter 1. Because it says they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Why? Because they did not worship or glorify the Creator. Do you know what the word glorify means? It means to honor or credit. And it begins with that. If I don't give Pastor credit for something, then you could never give him the glory for doing that. So the way they initially steal God's glory is by stealing his credit for what he has made. And that's why it's important.
Amen.
Pastor.
Amen. Well, gives a whole new meaning to fearfully and wonderfully made, doesn't it? Amen. And on your way out tonight, if you will stop by the desk, we have certificates for 3 hours of biology for each one of you. No, that's fascinating. Fascinating. It amazes me at the genius of God and how he has put us and this world together for his glory. All right, I mentioned earlier there are the love offering envelopes, and if you have your envelope ready, be sure. Someone asked me earlier if I make out a check, who do I make it out to? You can make it out to West Conroe Baptist Church. I would put on your check Creation Conference, and then put on the envelope Creation Conference. Our accounting team will count them in the morning. And they're extremely good, but that'll help even cover any mistakes or whatever, okay? And if you have cash, you can just put cash in the envelope, put your name on it, and it will be credited to your contribution record, and then we're going to give them one check at the end. All right? So, guys, let me lead us in prayer and ask the Lord to bless this. Father, we just thank you again for this presentation. God, I thank you for giving Randy the understanding to be able to communicate it to us. And Lord, we do praise you. You are a wonderful and awesome God. And Lord, we give you the glory and the praise. And so, Lord, we ask you now to take this offering and use it to bless this ministry, to forward this ministry so that it can go beyond in places where it may not have yet been. And so we give it to you as an offering of worship and honor to you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys, if you will. While they're receiving this offering, Dr. Galuzzi, I'm going to ask you if you would just go ahead and go to the book table out there, the resource tables. If you want to go by there in just a moment when we're dismissed, they can help you with materials that you may want, and you can see Dr. Galuzzi out there as well. Don't forget, on the two end tables, there are some free resources that you're welcome to. If you did not get one of the little goodie bags this morning, there are some, I believe, out there by the middle little kiosk in the foyer. Feel free to grab one of those and take that with you. All right? Give us just a second to let them get through. Tomorrow morning, for those of you that heard, we are having two sessions for children. The first one begins at 9 o'clock. It's for grades K through 5. And then it concludes at 10:30. And then at 11 o'clock, we have a session for grades 6 through 12 that finishes up at 12:30. We've sent out invitations to a lot of the private schools in the area. I think the homeschool network has been notified via ICR, so some of you may have gotten that, but any of you are welcome to bring your children at those times. And then tomorrow night, we have our final session in here, and Mr. Brian Thomas will be with us. He's the dinosaur expert. In fact, I found out yesterday up his PhD studies in related to dinosaurs, so he knows what he's talking about. I'm looking forward to hearing about that. All right. Thank you so much. God bless you. Have a great evening.